Hello, this is Dick Smakman, and I'd like to talk to you about a book that I've written called Discovering Sociolinguistics From Theory to Practice. I'd like to give you a short summary of the book, who it's for, and explain why I wrote the book, so why I thought it was necessary to write yet another introduction to the field of sociolinguistics. Discovering Sociolinguistics introduces readers to the field of sociolinguistics. It gives them the tools to start to understand the theory and then to start up their own actual investigation. It's meant for budding researchers, for BA, MA students, for maybe supervisors who need some updating of their knowledge and who need more examples to work with, and in that way supervise their students' research. The book consists of 4 parts. The first part introduces the background of the field. The second part is the most important part from a theoretical point of view. It explains all the theories that are current at the moment and that you need to know about in order to practice sociolinguistics. The third part gives you, first of all, the steps that you need to go through to come to an actual research project. It also tells you, explains what a sociolinguistic research report, how it's written, what the steps are, its components. It gives you, for those who need it, some introduction into statistics and also sociophonetics. Some of you will need it. Others will already have that knowledge. The final part consists of 20 methodologies that you might consider when doing your own sociolinguistic investigation. There are a number of reasons why I wrote the book. The first is that I think that existing introductions into sociolinguistics, they presume a lot of knowledge when it comes to the readers knowing how to build their own investigation, how to go from theory to practice, and to find the right methodologies and theoretical context to put all the research in. I think that one needs more tools and more instruments and more steps to go from just reading about sociolinguistics to actually practicing it. And discovering sociolinguistics has that build-up to go from explaining the theory to handing the tools and the steps as to how to do to do research, to collect the data, to select data that are relevant, and to then systematically choose a methodology that fits the data and your theory, and it gives you references back to the theory in part 2 of the book that you can use to embed your research data. So the theoretical part is about language norms and ideology, about status, about folk linguistics, about attitudes, gender, age. It's even about second language sociolinguistics. And, at some point you'll have done your research, you have your data, and you can use the theory presented earlier on in the book to make it a nice methodological and theoretical unity. Another reason for writing the book is that it goes more than other introductions from very broad to narrow. So it doesn't assume that everybody knows what a variant and a variable is, and that everybody knows why there is such a field of sociolinguistics, why it exists. And it takes knowledge that a student can be presumed to have and builds on that. Another reason is that existing introductions into sociolinguistics seem to be based on the availability of research. Most research that is available is from the Anglo-Western part of the world. These books, they have a strong overrepresentation of Englishes in all of their shapes and sizes, and they explain how English mixes with other languages. And then in addition, they also mention Finnish, Dutch, Chinese, and all kinds of island languages. But the relative contribution of these other types of sociolinguistic contexts, the contribution is just too small in these books. So rather than giving so much attention to English only, it mentions all of the relevant research into English in New York, Glasgow, Auckland, and Creoles on islands and the use of English as a second language. It doesn't pay more attention to English than it does to Chinese or Japanese or African languages, or perhaps situations in South America. As a result, you will get a much broader spectrum of examples, and you will become more aware of the fact that the generalizability of theories is actually very limited. So it urges you to think about broader theories, but not necessarily from an Anglo-Western perspective. The book gives many more examples than any other book in the field that is introductory. And this means that those who are not from the Anglo-Western sphere, from those parts of the world, they will recognize more of their own world in the book, and will feel that the language situation that they grew up in is actually as sociolinguistically interesting as more mainstream contexts which are often described. The final reason for writing the book is that in existing books, there is a limited number of methodologies on offer, and there's very little systematic dealing with methodology. So again, the examples given in those books, which are very well presented, they're very good, but they are selected on the basis of availability, which means that as a reader, not only do you see all kinds of Englishes in those on the pages that you read, you also see all kinds of standard methodologies and not other methodologies, because they have simply not been used yet. Now, Discovering Sociolinguistics presents all methodologies as being options and tries to move you towards a specific methodology on the basis of your analytical and other needs. And so you don't need to take a well-known existing methodology and say, how am I going to find theory around it, and how does that fit my language situation? So in a way, it provides a broader spectrum of methodologies and tools to find the right one. I will now give you some more details on the build-up of the book. The first part is called Introducing Sociolinguistics. It starts with how the field was born, if you like, how it came to be. Then it explains the modern field, so the terminologies that are currently around and that people tend to use, and how these methodologies are used, and what the waves of the field are, and which wave we are in right now. After that, it explains language variation as an object. There are all kinds of ways to refer to language. You can say idiolect or ethnolect, or you can say vernacular or dialect. And that chapter it explains that all of these words have reasons for their usage, in the sense that if you use them, you also show what your approach is to language and language variation and sociolinguistics. So it explains the meanings of all those words, and it explains the connotations that they have. The fourth part of the first part of the book, so the fourth chapter, is called The Language of Culture, and it introduces culture as a sociolinguistic variable. The second part of the book consists of 8 chapters, and it discusses language choices of the individual, first of all. And then it discusses, we all have all kinds of choices to make. And those choices depend on who we are, where we were born, what we are like, what our personality is, what the circumstances are in which we communicate. And that chapter discusses that. The next chapter is about language norms and ideology. It talks about official languages, standard languages, about good language versus bad language, and ideologies behind it. Language and status all across the globe is discussed in the next chapter. There's a tour of the world, if you like, and status and its definitions and how it affects language is discussed in all kinds of larger cultures in the world, like China, Japan, the United States, Inner Circle, the English-speaking countries, Europe, South America, Slavic area, including Russia, and African languages. So what is status like? Because in the West, it's usually based on economic factors, but outside the West, many other quite unexpected factors seem to be relevant. Folk linguistics and perceptual dialectology are discussed in the next chapter. How ordinary people, and I'm using quotes here with my hands, how ordinary people view language and how they form opinions of language and how that reflects their attitudes and how it affects their actual language use and how they pass it on to others. Attitudes are in the next chapter, and the next two chapters are about the ones after that are very common themes in sociolinguistics: age and gender and sexuality. How in your lifetime language changes, but that might be because you are of a certain generation or that you are a certain age, and those are very different things. Or maybe you've had certain experiences and those affect your language. Your gender and sexuality, they also affect your language. You might like men or women or both or neither. That affects your language, and you feel perhaps that you should express these things, your age or your sexuality, when speaking. And this can explain how you and other people, how they speak. My favorite chapter is chapter 12, which is called Second Language Sociolinguistics. It's based on the premise that language learning and first language acquisition are actually very close nowadays, because for some people you just don't know if they're speaking their first or second language. They might feel it's their second, but it isn't, or vice versa. And the reasons how to determine whether somebody is in an L2 or L1, second language or first language context using language is very interesting. It talks about didactics, about the cognitive aspects, and about the diversity in the world, which makes the dividing line between first and second language sociolinguistics very vague. Part 3 gives you a statistical introduction in normal words, so you won't be confused too much. It gives you the steps towards a sociolinguistic research project. It tells you how to write research down. It gives you an introduction to sociophonetics. And I think, that part you can just cherry pick 1 or 2 chapters on the basis of your personal needs. The easiest thing would be to read through all 4 of them and see whether maybe in your knowledge something is missing. The last part, doing sociolinguistics, is where it all comes together, and you find ways to investigate language. For instance, there is an explanation on how to do an interview or a matched guise test, or how to do a very exciting street use survey, which is a highly underused tool, I think. There is perception research, attitude research, descriptive research, dialectological research, and eavesdropping research, and all kinds of other interesting and exciting investigations are described there. It's split up into 4 chapters. Language out there, so language that is already available, language that you still need to elicit, and language that naturally occurs. The final chapter is about investigating attitudes. So that's a summary of a more detailed summary of the book. The book comes with a very long index with many cross-references, and you can look up, you can intuitively come up with certain words that might guide you towards finding the right chapter or section, and you will find those intuitive words they're put in the index as well, and the glossary, which is relatively short because there's a long index. The glossary gives you some explanations of words that are in the text, but that might need some more explanation. With this book comes a website with many teaching materials for teachers, PowerPoint presentations, references to websites, and it gives you actually a lot of example investigations, as does the book, by the way. In the fourth part of the book, there are sample investigations, which if you're a teacher, you can just give to your students, and they can go out and collect data in a systematic way and collect it with theoretical research. Now, connect it with theories, and on the website are some even more accessible types of simple investigations that really warm students up to doing actual research. There are more writing tips, there are researching tips, there are links to pages, there are activities that you can use in class. And so this book and the website is for free. You can just together you can use them to make a nice, broad, culturally broad and methodologically broad and theoretically decent course in which you introduce the field of sociolinguistics. Thank you very much.